My Stirling single part 46, fitting the water pipe connections and reassembling the tender. Here's a shot of the tender connectors, and I'm going to connect these to the engine using silicone rubber. The first thing to do is to cut some pieces to length. On screen at the moment is the web address of the company where I usually buy my silicone rubber tubing from. It's very convenient for me because autosiliconehoses.com is in Mirfield, West Yorkshire, quite near where I used to live, and in fact my daughter Charlotte lives even closer to the place. The other week I bought a length of silicone rubber tubing from this company, and it was delivered using Hermes, who are now called Every. They may have changed the name, but it's the same company. They attempted to deliver the package to an address completely unknown to me, but thankfully it did arrive the next day. I'm fitting the pieces of silicone rubber tubing to the ends of the pipes using cable ties. It's just a very convenient way of doing it. But from the same company, Auto Silicone Hoses, I think I'm going to buy some proper silicone rubber tubing clips. A quick health and safety warning about using cable ties. Always use a flat-sided cutter because a normal side cutter will leave sharp edges. At this stage of the job, I've left the silicone rubber hoses longer than I need them. Once I've assembled the tender tank onto the tender frames, I'll cut them to the correct length, and hopefully the tender should be somewhere near the engine. It's worth mentioning that these pieces of silicone rubber tubing have an internal diameter of 6 mm, which is a very good push fit on a piece of 1/4 inch pipe. And I also made the smaller pipe adapters 1/4 inch diameter too. Here are the tender parts sat on the bench in my new workshop extension, which is attached to the house. This is very convenient for me in the colder weather because this area has a central heating system, whereas the workshop just uses the air conditioning in reverse function, like a heat pump, but in the very cold weather it doesn't pump much heat at all. With the tender frames in the correct position on the tank, as you can see, none of the piping is fouling the axles. The brake rod is very close, but the axle boxes can't go any lower than they currently are, so it's alright. In a previous episode I showed the bolts that I'm going to use to secure the tender frames to the tank, and once again here they are, in non-magnetic stainless steel. These fit into bushes underneath the tank, but they actually go all the way through into the water space, so when I fit these I'm going to use some Loctite 542 to seal them. Originally the tender frames were secured to the tank using slot-headed screws, but I prefer these bolts. The only problem, of course, is how to fit them. With the slot-headed machine screws it was easy, I just used a screwdriver, but now I can't do that. But never mind, I really do enjoy problem solving. I've done it most of my life and I've been married twice. Initially I tried to tighten these bolts using the 4 fingers of each hand, but that wasn't a good idea. So putting my 4 fingers into reverse, I removed the bolt. Besides, I hadn't applied any Loctite 542. I think it's time to apply some of this and try again using a different method. Please note that Loctite 542, as it says on the bottle, is a thread sealant. It is not a retainer like 603, and a retainer is the last thing that you want to use on a job like this. After a generous application of Loctite 542 to the threads of the bolt, I also applied some around the edges of the hole of the tender mounting. And this is how I managed to initially tighten the bolts. I'm using one of these special universal joint adapters, and I machined the socket itself so it fitted onto the job. For the final tightening I used this tool, which is a good quality socket ratchet driver, and being very careful not to shear off the bolt, I tightened it just enough. The problem was I couldn't get the socket off the bolt because the ratchet driver didn't go all the way into the socket. Instead, I refitted this part, the universal adapter, which went all the way into the socket, and then by wobbling the socket about it came loose from the bolt. I repeated this process in an identical manner for the other 3 bolts, and here you can see the very useful universal drive adapter, which is absolutely perfect for doing this job. After fully tightening all of the bolts using the socket driver, the job was finished. The tender frames are now secured to the tank. All I need to do now is turn the tender the right way up, put it on the piece of track and make sure everything aligns. In this clip I'm being very careful not to cut my fingers when I cut the silicone rubber tubing to length. With all the silicone rubber tubing connected and the pressure connector from the hand pump in the tender, this is what it looks like. But there is unfortunately a problem. The tender is too far away from the engine. But with the original drawbar, the tender is too close to the engine and I can't get my fingers in there. Besides, the original drawbar, in my opinion, is far too short. I will modify this. What I'm doing here is testing the pressure that the locomotive exerts on the track from each wheel. Doing this is very important with any steam locomotive. So instead of covering the how to do it in this episode, I covered the procedure in detail in part 22 of Steam Engines for Beginners. By adjusting the suspension and the balance of the locomotive, you really can get these single wheelers to pull a lot of weight. This video has been quite interesting because I don't have any lighting. There's been a power cut for the last 4 hours in the village. Thankfully, there's enough daylight coming through the windows to make the video possible. Unfortunately though, I can't show you this machine working. I bought this the other day from a junk shop in York. I also bought a couple of old typewriters and with a bit of attention they both work perfectly. This item was totally new and still in its box. It wasn't very expensive, so I bought it. The problem is when I press the green button nothing happens, but that's mainly due to the fact that there is a power cut at the moment. And when I switch on the lights they don't work either. When I have an electrical supply to the workshop, in a future video I will show this machine in action and see whether it's suitable for what I want it to do. And that is it for this video. I will finish it by showing the Stirling single on a piece of track on the workbench. Wherever you may be, stay safe, stay healthy. Thanks for watching and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my main Steam Models website and click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that you can find other videos that you may like to watch. And by using the playlists you can actually watch the videos back to back.